Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing the Ohio CDC Association with our friends at the Ohio CDC Association. We have plenty of their team with us here today, so they'll be introducing themselves in a moment. But first, I just wanted to go over a couple quick things with everyone, just to make sure your webinar moves smoothly. So first off, we're going to be taking questions at the end of today's webinar. But if you have any questions during the webinar, please type those into the chat box, and we will get those answered once the formal presentation concludes. Also, if you have any weird things happening with your webinar today, such as sound is weird, slides aren't moving correctly, just close out the window, re-click the link that was sent to you, and that should solve 99% of your problems. So without further ado, I'll turn things over first to Tori, and she and the rest of her team can introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin, and thank you to Heritage Ohio for hosting us today. We're excited to talk with you all about the Ohio CDC Association and share a little bit about our organization, opportunities for folks around the state to work alongside us, and also talk about some of the recent changes that have happened and recent opportunities in housing policy in the state of Ohio, because we know that's a hot topic all over the state. But before we get into any of that, want to make sure folks are aware of who we are and what we do. Hopefully folks can see the slides progressing here. But just to start off with our mission statement. So we are a statewide membership association that works on fostering vibrant neighborhoods and improving quality of life through in communities across the state through advocacy and capacity building. So the easiest way to say that is that we are here in support of organizations that are doing work directly on the ground. So our traditional member is a nonprofit organization, nonprofit community development corporation, but we're very broad in who we include in our coalition. We think that there's a lot of different folks who are doing important work that improves Ohio's communities, and we like to welcome everyone in. So with that, I'm gonna ask our staff to introduce themselves. And we will we'll go around the screen where we have one person who has had a little technical difficulty, so I will introduce her for everyone. Suzanne Parks is the Director of Economic Inclusion, and she is, we're hoping, oh, I think that you all, I'm sorry, I am getting Teams messages which are popping up over the screen, but Suzanne will be joining us as soon as we can figure out the tech pieces. Andrew, you want to go next?
Sure. Andrew Dodson, I'm our Director of Capacity Building.
But Julia
Robinson, Member Capacity Manager.
Arabella Zambito, Communications and Policy Associate.
And for those of you who may have been familiar with the organization before, we have a lot of new faces on our team. There are a number, we've got a couple new folks, lots of good new energy, but also have some great through lines from the work of the organization. The organization is 40 years old. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. So we are excited to continue the legacy of the folks before us who have been supporting community development work throughout Ohio for a long time. So we recognize that this is an audience that that may not think of themselves always as doing community development work. Some folks may be more focused on specifically historic preservation. So we wanted to talk about how we define community development. And the easiest way we have found to do that is to talk about specific kinds of activities that make up the field of community development. So we're going to talk through our 5 pillars, which are really the 5 things that are the core of what our membership is doing. Plenty of folks do more than just these 5 things. But if you are doing at least one of these 5, we think of you as within our network and doing community development work. So the first I'm going to talk about, and we're going to spend more time on this later in this session, is affordable housing. So obviously this is a hot topic in places all across the state right now. And what, for the most part, community developers are doing around affordable housing is working on rebuilding or building for the first time in a long time housing markets in neighborhoods across the state. That may look like actually building housing itself. It may look like managing housing. It could be helping people who are homeowners access affordable home repairs. And it may be helping people get ready for homeownership by working on credit repair or homeownership education. So we got our second pillar.
So our second pillar is community engagement. This includes building relationships, empowering and informing individuals, and developing communications within the community. Other terms used to talk about community engagement could be civic engagement, public participation, community collaboration, and stakeholder management.
All right.
Hey, third pillar here is community economic development. So this is all about building wealth for your communities and for your individuals in your communities specifically by attracting capital, by providing employment opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities, workforce development. Those of you who are running Main Streets programs are squarely in this category.
Our next pillar is, thank you. Our next pillar is food access. So CDC support and strengthen local food systems. And this can look like food pantries, empowering residents to grow locally, participating in regenerative agriculture, or just connecting local farmers with the local economy.
And finally, is financial empowerment. So this is a pretty broad topic, but really is around helping people feel that they are in control of their financial futures. So that can look like education, making sure people understand all of the complex pieces of our banking system, of their credit, of the home buying process. And it can also look like asset building tools. So opportunities for folks to save toward assets that are going to help them grow wealth over time. So that could be something like purchasing a home or starting a small business. So we're happy to answer questions about this at the end, but wanted to make sure that we gave that kind of broad overview about what our pillars look like, so you know that you're in the right place. And now Julia Robinson, our member capacity manager, is going to talk a little bit about membership.
Thanks, Tori. So the Ohio CDC is a membership association, and our membership looks a bit broader than just your traditional CDC. So we have categories for financial institutions, for-profit developers, local governments, anyone who's really invested in bettering the community. There is a space for you, traditional nonprofits, and CDCs and CDFIs, community development financial institutions. So our membership, can we hit the next slide? Oh, thank you. So our members gain access to a variety of programs, benefits, and opportunities for enhanced leadership and professional development. I won't go through this entire list, but we are working on creating more opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, professional development within the association, whether that's board engagement and committee engagement, or just leading a training or connecting with one of our peer-to-peer programs as an expert. And something I think a lot of our members often forget is that membership is with the organization. So all of the staff within the organization has access to these benefits. So if you have a staff member who's maybe running an affordable housing program and another who's doing your HR, there are benefits for both of those individuals. And our membership is comprehensive of the state. We cover all 88 counties. This is sort of a heat map of our density across the state. As you see, we're fairly equal to the demographics and just like how population lays out in Ohio, but we're really grateful for our almost 300 members. And I'll get into sort of some of how we classify and identify our members and how they classify and identify themselves. So because we are so broad and spread across the state, it's helpful for us to survey our members to understand what their changing needs are and how we can continue to provide programs that remain relevant to them. So as you see, our members in our 2023 bi-yearly, oh no, I'm not going to say it like that. We conduct surveys every other year. I'll say it like this. So in 2023, we conducted a survey to members, one of the first after we started really transitioning out of the pandemic. So this was very informative to us in our future planning, which you'll hear about more. And as you see, a lot of our members serve urban, metro, and micro areas, suburban as well, Appalachian, and rural. So we truly are representative of all of Ohio's kind of ecosystems. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you'll hear more about our program's future in the later presentation, but we asked our members to let us know really what they're engaging with and how they identify themselves within our 5 pillars and programs. So as you see, networking is one of the most utilized benefits that our members see within the network. And we really, again, see a lot of value in that peer-to-peer connection as we are fairly diverse and representative of the entire field of CDCs. So considering the timing of the survey, we asked our members what were some of the biggest changes and challenges they saw in the communities that they served. By a long shot, housing affordability was reported one of those biggest challenges, followed by quality of life and just general rising costs. So these are some of the things that we consider when we think about programs and services that we offer to the membership. And on the flip side of that question, we asked our members what were some of the most positive changes that they saw. It was great to see that general economic funding was one of the most highly reported changes, followed by increased collaboration as we continue to broaden the definition of CDCs, increased community attitude and engagement, expansion of the field, and increased resources for basic needs were some of the other things that were reported as positive changes. And then again, because this really informs a lot of our programs and strategic planning processes, and it also is a great way for our members to let us know how they feel about membership, like what they want to see. We asked our members what were some of those greatest needs that they saw. Staff and organizational capacity being reported the most. And as we just wrapped up 7 meetings across the state to connect with our members, this was something that was continuously echoed to us in person. And then following that, like very closely, was sustainable funding. So how could our members find ways to maintain funding that falls outside of a grant cycle and an application cycle? So these are things that we're working on, providing more benefits for members. I think that's it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Julia. So we are now.
I see.
We are now going to.
I'm sorry. If you're interested in membership, you can reach out to me. And if you have further questions about some of those benefits and maybe which ones would be best for your organization, I can sort of be a match board to connect you to those benefits. Now I'm done. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Julia. So we're now going to transition to talk about our programs. So a significant benefit of being a part of the Ohio CDC Association network is we run a number of programs that help provide support in direct capacity for members to support their own communities. So first up, we're going to have Andrew Dodson.
Hey, so yeah, Julia and I get to help manage our AmeriCorps Vista program. AmeriCorps Vista, Vista stands for Volunteers in Service to America. So members sign up for a year-long assignment at one of our member organizations. They receive living stipend, educational support, healthcare support, as well as this opportunity to get some experience and really do some important capacity building work directly in the industry. On the other side, our members get access to a full-time employee to work on capacity building. And our cost of the program right now is around $2,000 from the member side. So you're getting essentially a full-time employee subsidized by the federal government, and with us able to manage your grant reporting on your behalf. So it's a really, really awesome program. Just this past year, our Vista cohort was able to leverage 3,800 plus total volunteer hours for our member organizations and the communities they serve. You can go to the next slide, I believe. Also, we mentioned the training and technical assistance. So we produce a series of webinars throughout the year, and those include experts from outside of our network, but also, as Tori mentioned, we do like to leverage the experts inside of our network. So some of these are presented by members. We have one coming up with IFF about that speaks directly to the need to find more general economic funding as one example of the kinds of things that we can leverage with our membership. Again, last year, almost 650 people attended our trainings. We're already up to 8 this year, and we're going to hit past our numbers from last year, which is exciting. Go to the next slide, I believe. Our microbusiness development program is on behalf of the Ohio Department of Development. Each fall, our members are able to apply for financial and technical assistance to run their own microbusiness development programs in their communities. So we're able to support members directly through that program to help them help their communities develop new business or expand micro business. Last year, and this number is pretty incredible, 848 businesses across Ohio were created or expanded through this program. Our next one, again, kind of in that same it's the same idea, but more targeted towards individuals, specifically the savings and match programs. They say IDA, that's for individual development account, because the way that these work is you set up a development account for an individual. They are able to deposit a certain amount of money, take some either general or asset specific financial training, and then their money is matched or exceeded to be able to invest in things like home ownership. So you can use these funds towards purchasing a home. Again, you can use this in addition to the other micro enterprise program to supplement that program. Folks can save to start their own business, capitalize their own business. Also, really important to us is the refugee IDA program. So folks who are new to our communities are able to use that again for home ownership, micro business. They can also save for healthcare needs. They can save for education, including higher education or ESL. And they can also save for their first or second vehicle, which folks who are new to Ohio, that can be a huge barrier to economic success. So those are a handful of programs that we're really proud to run. I think Tori is up next.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our policy advocacy work. So something that Ohio CDC Association is really passionate about, and a reason that we know a lot of our members participate in our coalition is because of our work on state policy advocacy. So, and federal advocacy when there are opportunities to make an impact. So we are regularly at the State House engaging with policymakers around a variety of different issues. But we really try to make sure that our advocacy not only is driven by our members' needs, but as often as possible is actually coming from our members themselves. So instead of us, speaking on your behalf at the State House, what we really think is most powerful is trying to connect our members with their state legislators, especially in district, to show the impact tangibly so people can understand what it is that our members do and the impact that they have on their communities. So we're always looking for opportunities to highlight the work of community developers around the state, to try to advocate for additional resources, to make sure programs are friendly to them, and essentially to grow the pie for this work that we think is really important. So to that end, we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about some policy updates coming out of the state of Ohio over the last year. So as you all saw, we have 5 pillars, and all of them are important to us. but we have been very focused on housing and affordable housing policy over the last year. In part because, as you all saw in our membership survey, that was what members said was their greatest need in their communities, but also because thankfully there's been a recognition of that need at the State House. And there's been a couple of opportunities for policymakers to look at these issues and to hopefully try to make an impact. So I want to start by talking through a couple of programs that came out of the most recent state budget, which was passed in summer of 2023. So it's a 2-year budget that the state of Ohio passes, and is often a place where a lot of the policy changes that happen coming out of the State House really occur. There's obviously policy making that happens all year long. They are a full-time legislature, although they're about to go on a break basically through the election. But the budget is a period of a lot of activity and where there's really a lot of opportunity to advocate for change. So there were 3 housing programs that came out of the most recent biennial budget that are accessible to community developers in one way or another, or to local governments in partnership with community developers in a lot of cases. So one that got a lot of attention, which is great and really important, was the state of Ohio for the first time created a companion tax credit to the federal low-income housing tax credit. So for those of you who work in affordable housing, you are surely aware of the federal low-income housing tax credit and its impact on new construction, in particular in the state of Ohio, that is limited to folks usually below 80% area median income. And a number of states had created companion tax credits that allowed for additional capital to be leveraged into building affordable housing in Ohio. So this is relatively early still in its rollout, but the Ohio Housing Finance Agency is the organization that is administering this program. And they're able to pair the federal and the state credits together to help give additional equity that can go into affordable housing projects. So if you are a LIHTC developer, you probably know this well, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but do just want to highlight this was really a big win for affordable housing production in Ohio. The second program that came out of the most recent state budget was a brand new program called the Single Family Tax Credit. And this tax credit was created with the goal of more production of single family homes for home ownership. And it works in a way that is somewhat similar to the low income housing tax credit, where a project is actually awarded tax credits instead of money. And they then need to find an investor who is interested in reducing their state income tax burden that purchases the credit from the developer. And then the purchase price of that tax credit is invested directly into the project. So if you're not familiar with tax credits and you have not worked with them before, it can be kind of a tricky thing to wrap your head around. But there are typically organizations that are syndicators that will help do that matchmaking between the equity investor, the person who's looking to reduce their income tax liability, and the affordable housing developer who is looking for that capital to go into their project. So this is a program that is completely unique in the country. There's no other program that looks quite like this. And the legislature allocated $50 million a year for 4 years for this credit. So we're very early on in the rollout of this program as well. There's still a lot of details that are being worked out. In particular, because so often with tax credits, there has to be this the matchmaker, the syndicator that is part of the process. that market is really still being built. And the pricing, basically how much folks are willing to pay for that tax credit that can then go into the project, the pricing is still unknown. So there's a lot of questions still about this program, but it does seem like it will be a real area of opportunity to increase housing development in the state. And you can see, for those of you who are looking at the chat, Arabella has put the single family tax credit application into the chat if you all are interested. Why we especially are excited about this program and the opportunity that it presents is that it's not just for new construction, but will also allow for the rehab of single family homes, or in some cases, multifamily structures. And so for those of you who may be working in a Main Street kind of situation around Ohio, even though this does say it's a single family tax credit, there could be instances where this may be applicable. Sometimes with mixed use or other kinds of projects that may be in smaller downtowns. So CDCs are eligible as applicants for this tax credit directly, but they have to partner with their local government. So the state is trying to make sure that everyone is working in tandem with each other to be able to utilize this program. This program is not targeted specifically at low-income homeowners. In this case, buyers, the homes have to be for sale. So this is a home ownership program. So it could be condo units if it is in a multifamily structure. And they have to be at or below 120% of area median income. So the interest here with the Ohio Housing Finance Agency was recognizing that in many parts of the state, even folks who are moderate and even into middle income have really been struggling with housing costs as well. So this program it attempts to help them access more affordable housing at that income level as well. So the other thing you can see here is that the Ohio Housing Finance Agency is accepting applications as we speak. They are accepting them on a rolling monthly basis. So the next deadline is going to be July 26th. The third program and final program I want to highlight from the last budget cycle is the Welcome Home Ohio program. So Welcome Home Ohio was designed to provide grants and in some cases tax credits as well for the purchase or rehab or new construction of single family homes again. And in this case, the program is structured a little bit differently. It is specifically focused on buyers who are at or below 80% of area median income. So this is more focused on more traditional sort of affordable housing, folks who are lower moderate income. But part of the program also attempts to make these homes more affordable to folks by capping the sales price. So there is a $180,000 sales price cap that was placed in the statute. So this was not actually a decision made by the administrative agencies. This is something that if it were to change, has to be changed at the legislative level. The Welcome Home Ohio program really relies on county land banks as the leaders in this, in the development and the acquisition of the homes. So only county land banks and city governments are able to apply for this program. Many of them, there's been one round of awards already made in this program. And there were 17 projects that were awarded. 10 of them had a community development organization or community development nonprofit as a partner. So in many cases, even though the county land bank or the city is actually leading the charge, CDCs have been crucial to actually getting these dollars out the door. So again, very early in this program, the awards came out about a month ago. So there, no shovels in the ground yet to see what the impact will be. But again, we're excited that there are resources available for home rehab and for new construction, particularly for low and moderate income homeowners. One thing, and again, rolling applications are being accepted for both the grants and the tax credits. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the tax credits in this instance. Again, tax credit markets are tricky, and it takes a lot of capacity and relationships for developers and community developers in particular to be able to access those. So the grants have been the primary place where folks have been applying and receiving the program dollars so far. But if you're interested, the Ohio Department of Development is administering this program, and both grants and tax credits are accepting rolling applications starting this Friday. So essentially, until they run out of money, they will continue to accept applications over the course of this allocation. So I want to now switch gears a little bit to what's coming. So that's what's already been done. The state legislature has approved these 3 new programs as of last spring, but we know it's not enough. And fortunately, it seems that there's a consensus within the state legislature that more needs to be done beyond just these 3 programs. So the Ohio Senate convened a select committee on housing late last year that met over the course of about 6 months, hearing testimony from folks all over the state about what housing issues looked like in their area. So the select committee was chaired by Senator Michelle Reynolds, who's from Canal Winchester, just outside of Columbus, and involved a bipartisan group of state senators. And they actually traveled the state. So they had hearings in the Ohio State House, but they traveled all around the state, really in all 4 corners of the state, and heard an incredible amount of testimony from people who are working on these issues every day and working really on the range of issues that housing touches. So folks who are building and maintaining affordable housing, folks who are doing home repairs, housing counselors, and then folks who are working on homelessness issues. So dealing with outdated infrastructure in homeless shelters, and also trying to create tenant protections to make sure folks are not ending up on the street in the first place. So the select committee released a report that came out in mid-April, and it involved a long list of recommendations that they hope to pursue. One piece of really good news that came from this as well is that the committee was made permanent. So a select committee typically means it's just short term. It's looking at an issue that only exists for a short period of time. But the Senate came to recognize that housing is an issue that's not going to go away. So there's now a permanent committee on housing in the Senate. And alongside the report, they also, the co-chairs of the committee put forth 4 bills that address some of the issues that were raised within the report itself. I'm sorry, I think we've got a little background noise, gonna mute here. Okay. So these 4 bills were companions with the report that was released, and they are Senate Bills 243 through 246, so that's what's here along the top. And they deal with the majority of the, at least kind of low-hanging fruit recommendations that came out of the Select Committee's report. The first issue, and something that was discussed a lot within the committee, was around local zoning reform. So you all may be familiar with the national conversation that has been happening around zoning and its impact on housing affordability and on housing construction. And in many cases, local governments have zoning codes that maybe have not been updated for many years. and also often include a real emphasis on single family zoning that is really restrictive and makes it challenging for density to be included in their municipalities. The impact of that, of course, being that it makes it more challenging to build multifamily housing or housing that may be more affordable to folks of lower incomes, or even in some cases to middle incomes. So what the select committee did, instead of proposing a specific fix or their proposal of a fix on zoning regulations, is that they put forward sort of a messaging bill, which essentially says that they intend to enact legislation that addresses local zoning regulations. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but we do know that in the state budget last year, there was a provision that was included for a period of time that would have created a couple of best practices in local zoning that the state would encourage local governments to adopt, and they would encourage that with a carrot. Basically, they would give them funding to update their local zoning codes if they adopted some of these best practices that may help speed up housing production and hopefully reduce zoning costs. Of course, the devil's in the details. We'll need to see what's actually in this bill. Ohio, is a strong home rule state, and it's going to, in many states where zoning has been addressed at the statewide level, that's not the case. So it will be interesting to see where this lands, because we know that there is, that home rule is going to have to be respected as the state legislature thinks about zoning. So the second bill is Senate Bill 244. Property taxes have become a significant topic of conversation at the state legislature as well. And there's actually been a joint committee that was created also in the budget last year. So joint committee between the Senate and the House that is focused on looking at the entire property tax system in Ohio. For those of you who have not spent a lot of time in our property tax system, it's extremely complicated. For those of you who know it well, I have a lot of respect for people who can wrap their heads around all of the various pieces and parts that go into determining an individual property owner's property taxes. So the committee has been interested in trying to wrap their heads around that and propose bigger solutions. But this bill, Senate Bill 244, is one solution that was brought forward that actually a coalition of folks, including many of our members, put together over time that would authorize local governments to create what they call residential stability zones that mirror something very similar to community reinvestment areas, or CRAs, which are local property tax abatements, where essentially a city could designate an area where they would reduce property taxes on homeowners that fit certain criteria. So it may have to do with income, may have to do with age. And in this case, the property taxes would not be made up by the state government. So this would be local governments working with their school districts to make these recommendations with a homeowner who would qualify, which would allow them to essentially not see their property taxes grow. The next bill is Senate Bill 245, which is a really meaty piece of legislation. There are a lot of different issues that are tackled in this bill. A couple of them having to do with some things that have been big topics lately. So one has to do with trying to deal with the fallout of the National Association of Realtors lawsuit that was settled earlier this year, and would require that folks who are buying or selling a home sign a representation agreement with their real estate agent up front. Won't get into this a ton, but the old model of how real estate professionals were compensated has essentially been declared illegal. And so this is one way that has been brought forward to try to deal with that challenge. There's also a provision around residential building codes and how if there are municipal governments that may not have capacity to administer their own building code enforcement, would create some ways that private building code inspectors could be certified by the state, and times when those folks could be brought on either on a temporary basis or even potentially permanently if a local government is really backed up on approving building permits. The two areas where we are particularly interested have to do with the real property transfers and the laws governing evictions. On evictions, this bill creates a fund that would allow for folks who are facing an eviction to access legal representation. The challenge in the bill is it does not fund the fund that is created, but it is a step toward recognizing that in many cases, landlords and tenants are not on equal footing in eviction proceedings because landlords typically have legal representation and tenants do not. So this bill would create some at least possibility of having more tenants have access to an attorney in an eviction proceeding. It also creates opportunities for eviction ceiling in certain circumstances and after a certain amount of time. We know that tenants often are challenged by a previous eviction, sometimes for many, many years after it has happened. Even if their credit is in much better shape, they have, they have been great tenants and paid their rent on time for years. A past eviction can really haunt them and make it challenging to find property or find a unit that will accept them. And then also allows for non-binding mediation. So there are a number of sort of tenant protections that are included in this bill. Then the final piece around real property transfers is something that we think is pretty significant because it would create, for the first time, the obligation that a real person is identified whenever a property transfers. So many of you have probably dealt with this issue if you are, especially in one of Ohio's legacy cities or in disinvested neighborhoods. You've come across LLCs that own property that is in bad shape, and you cannot find who the person is to hold accountable for the issues at the property. While this bill would not require properties that are in the same hands and not changing hands to register, it would require that a real human being with contact information be associated with any property that is changing hands. And we think that that could be pretty significant in dealing with some of our code enforcement issues and neglected properties around the state. And then finally, Senate Bill 246 is also has a lot in it. In addition to renaming the Ohio Department of Development, it would also change the composition of a couple of boards that administer housing funds in the state. So the Ohio Housing Trust Fund and the Ohio Housing Finance Agency would have members of the state legislature added to their boards. And then the other thing in this bill is it calls for some changes to that Welcome Home Ohio program that we talked about a moment ago. So like I mentioned, this was a very new program, and there are a lot of pieces of the program that are written directly into the statute, which makes it challenging to make changes as the program actually rolls out and folks see the impact that it has on the ground. So there are some administrative and bigger picture changes to Welcome Home Ohio, many of which we think will be very helpful in making that program easier to administer. I'm just going to talk about one other bill. This did not come directly out of the Senate Select Committee or out of the budget, but it does show the challenge in doing affordable housing advocacy that we have at the state level at the moment, because we've got a lot of great thoughts about how to create new programs, how to deal with a lot of the issues in the housing market that are coming out of the Select Committee, coming out of the last budget, and a real recognition, it seems, coming from the state legislature that there's a real need and indeed a crisis happening around housing in the state. But then unfortunately, on the flip side, we are still dealing with a number of challenges in understanding some of the really crucial elements to how housing development is funded in the state. So Senate Bill 94 was is still moving its way through the legislative process, but is very likely, I think, being voted on today, and will likely end up on the governor's desk here by the end of the week. And what it does is deal with the county recorder's fees. So the Ohio Housing Trust Fund is the only state source of affordable housing dollars that has a permanent source of funding, and it is funded through county recorder's fees. So every time someone is recording a document, a deed, a second mortgage, any kind of lien with their county recorder, the fees that are administered to do that service are split 50-50 between that county recorder's office and the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. And the trust fund funds things like the Community Housing Improvement Program, funds a number of homeless services, funds housing development resources that go to the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, and sometimes directly to organizations. And it also funds a lot of community development work. So the state's, our micro business program is actually funded through the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. Senate Bill 94 would disrupt this 20-year precedent of the 50-50 split between the county recorder's office and the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. What it would do is administer a new fee that would only go to the county recorders, and none of that would go to the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. So we have spent a lot of the last week working with some of our partners across the state, Ohio being an excellent example of that, trying to educate lawmakers about the impact of the trust fund and why we think this precedent is so important. Because at a moment where we have a real crisis around housing in Ohio, it's not the time to be fiddling with something that we know that works to create resources for housing development and homelessness services around the state. Unfortunately, we weren't successful in making that argument, but we were successful because we were able to mobilize so many of our members who had relationships with their state legislators, and work with our partners who work in the State House all the time, like Ohio, like some of the other statewide organizations. We were able to get a commitment that the legislature is going to work with us on figuring out ways to increase resources for the trust fund. So we lost the battle, but we're still fighting the war on this one. But I mention that because I think it is important to show that while we have a lot of progress, we sometimes are taking some steps back, and there's a lot of education that has to happen, even with folks in the state legislature, about the impact of existing programs, because there's often misperceptions that there isn't housing need in every part of the state, or that resources are only flowing to big urban counties, which just isn't true. And so it's crucial, and part of why it's so important for us that we engage our membership in policy advocacy and education when there's not a big fire happening at the State House, so that we can shift gears and start advocacy when we need to. All right, I'm going to skip this one and go on to Arabella, who's going to talk to us about how you all can keep track of what's going on.
So every third week of the month, we release a policy newsletter, and that includes state and federal policy updates, our bill tracker, which is consistently being updated, and any other relevant information related to community development and policy. Our policy newsletter is brand new. We've only released 2 so far. The last we released was just last week. If you're interested in reading our past newsletters, which is just 2, or would like to sign up to receive the newsletter in the future, you can email me at my email right below there.
All right. I think I skipped a slide here. Yep. All right. Andrew, you want to talk to us about the conference?
Yeah, but I want to editorialize just really briefly on the policy stuff, if you don't mind. I think there's a thread here. So I come from a historic preservation world, and I know some of the challenges that you face. And I think something that's been encouraging to me about this coming from that world is how frustrating it can be for developers, for preservation organizations, that there is federal and state money out there to do commercial reinvestment. There's money out there to do rehabs that are going to be for rent, but you also want to encourage home ownership. And so how do you find money to put into these historic places that allows them to be home ownership opportunities? And so I think that while it's, not a one-for-one direct replacement, there's probably a lot of properties that could benefit from these specific programs, those sort of core neighborhoods around your Main Street districts. And I also think that, I did some work in a state previously where the state historic tax credit was both refundable and was available for home ownership opportunities, owner-occupied residential. There is action at the State House around this stuff, and that seems like the sort of advocacy that can help move the dial, right? So if we could figure out how to say, hey, can we leverage this existing program and combine it with things like the single family tax credit or Welcome Home Ohio with a more traditional tax credit type of situation you guys are already doing. So there could be some opportunities here to shoot some shots, if you will, while they're having these conversations. And I would love to, coordinate and talk with folks who are interested about that, because I do think that preservation is such a critical piece of community development. These are these communities didn't just show up when we started working them, and so we need to be able to carry that thread from where they began to where we're at today, which I think is a pretty decent segue into our 40th annual conference. So this conference this year is going to be in Cleveland, September 25th through the 27th. And my theme for the conference this year is community development remix. The thought process being Cleveland is a music city, and a remix is when a musician or a DJ takes an existing piece of music, puts their own spin on it, and puts it back out for maybe the next generation to hear. And so we really wanted to take that lens on the work that we're doing as community development organizations, folks who fund that work, for folks who work adjacent to that work. And we're reflecting that in how we're asking for our proposals for our sessions. So if we can hit the next slide real quick. So this is our what's your remix is how we're asking for folks. We're not asking for proposals for sessions. We're asking you to play as your remix, right? And we're not just asking folks that say capital CDC, capital CDFI, right? Because we recognize that there are all different kinds of communities, and there are so many organizations doing community development that might have no idea that they're actually doing that work. So I would imagine that most of the folks on the call here see themselves as community developers in one way or another. But I'd love to, both welcome your pitches for our conference. Would love to hear innovative solutions that you guys are coming up with to some of the challenges that we're facing, hear your success stories, but also to think hard about who you partner with in your communities, who's doing really interesting work, creating communities. And so this slide is sort of an example of just a sampling of the various folks that we think very much fit into our network that we want to be able to bring in and support. So if anybody has any questions about that or wants to coordinate on, playing us your remix, we would be very, very grateful for that.
All right. Well, thanks, Andrew. And what we want to leave you with before we go to questions is we'd love to have you as part of our network. We have, oh, I think Julia is actually there. Never mind. She is going to talk through this.
Hi, yes. So echoing what Tori is saying, love to have you a part of our network. Our membership is fairly diverse. There is a space for entities of all different sizes, shapes, categorizations. So if you are interested in becoming a member, you can reach out to me. My email is on the slide. You can also visit our website, which does have an option for you to self-select the category of membership and purchase that online via credit card. And we do have a new member discount code, which gets you 50% off membership for the first year. And our membership year runs from February of the current year until January of the next. And we prorate after our annual conference in September. So thank you all for being here and listening.
Yeah, thank you all. Be happy to answer questions if anyone has them.
Yes, if you have questions, type those into the chat box now. I'd just like to thank our friends over at the Ohio CDC for doing this webinar with us today. Great information for all of our communities around Ohio. I'll start off with our first question here that I have. Could you explain the difference? It's often used now kind of interchangeably with affordable housing as the term workforce housing. Could you explain how those two relate to one another?
It's a great question. And to be completely candid, it depends on who you are talking to, what each of those terms mean. I think that there has been a strategic decision in a lot of cases to be thoughtful about the language that folks are using in advocating for additional housing resources, to make clear that when we're talking about affordable housing, that is not necessarily just housing for low-income folks, but that affordable housing really means affordable. There's affordable housing to everyone. That it just is. It depends on your income, what that affordable unit and what that affordable rent or mortgage looks like. So in a lot of cases, workforce housing is often referring to housing that is affordable to people who are making, middle-class wages. So teachers, firefighters, folks who you want to have living in any community that it's, it's crucial to have as, you don't want your teachers to be spending 2 hours a day commuting to get into your city. You want them there focused on educating kids. So there's not a technical term. It's really something that folks have been using as a way to advocate for additional resources.
Thanks, Tori. Our next question here sort of has to do with, CDCs, but also any other downtown organizations in communities. So, people are having conversations, obviously, about affordable housing in most communities, but what are some good first steps that communities and their leaders can be taking to start this conversation, actually get the ball rolling on making a true affordable housing policy in communities?
Just to make sure I'm understanding the question, it's really around first steps on addressing housing issues locally.
Yep,
is that right?
And just what can downtown and other development organizations in downtown areas be doing to advance the conversation and get things actually happening, rather than just saying it's an important issue and then that's where it stops?
I think that is a great question. So I think having conversations with your local government is really crucial. My guess is they are thinking about this too, and they are trying to figure out who their partners are to move forward. And so if you haven't had a conversation with local elected officials or your planning director or community development department, I would definitely start there, because I think in a lot of cases, folks feel like they have to address this kind of on their own, when really the way that we're going to tackle this problem is collectively, particularly locally, because it's going to require lots of different stakeholders to come to the table to come up with a plan. And I think, especially for downtown organizations, to show that you are an ally in thinking about how to make sure your community is accessible to lots of different kinds of people, that's huge. Because, you know, I think that there's perception issues around affordable housing that are a real challenge. And to be able to say we want our downtown to be inclusive and to be accessible to lots of different kinds of people can really help jumpstart a focus on housing affordability in your community.
I want to just editorialize just a bit on that, because what Tori was saying about there not being a specific definition of affordable housing is absolutely right. But generally, if you say housing affordability, what you're saying is 30% of your income as an individual should be the maximum that you're putting into your housing, whether that's your rent and utilities, your mortgage, insurance, utilities. And so that's why it's this sliding scale, right? So it's like, if you say we want our downtown to have a bottom, price of X, that's by definition going to be out of reach of certain people if you consider that they should only be spending 30% of their income on this particular thing, right? So I guess what I'm getting at with the distinction there is that talking about that, saying that, housing burden means that you're paying more than that 30% on your housing. And a housing burden can also include transportation costs, because you might be paying more than that because you have to live so far from your job that there's transportation costs push you well over that threshold as well. So then you have the conversation around, we want to make this affordable for everybody, but to do that, what does that number actually look like? And that's where you start getting into this like percent of AMI or area median income, which can be a very inexact science as well. But again, try to frame this around, rather than the specific price of the units, it should be about how much of a burden it is on the people to live there. Does that make, am I saying that correctly, Tony, or because I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but when you start talking about specific sorts of numbers or specific sorts of people, right, or households, so it's like, are we building affordable housing, or are we building workforce housing, or are we building luxury apartments? Really, you should be doing all of the above, because there are people at all of those levels. And so how do we know what that number is? Well, that number should be that folks aren't going over their 30% of what they should spend. And so you can have that conversation. So like, how much are you spending on your housing? How much does, do these different options? How much of the percentage of the person's wealth are they spending on this particular asset? That can be a way to separate out the feelings of them versus us, or the thing that comes with different levels of income. So like everybody should be at that 30% or less, right? That is the whole idea.
Thanks, Tori and Andrew. Final question here, so we can wrap things up here. So outside of affordable housing, what are some of the issues you've seen other CDC associations around Ohio working on in their communities right now?
Yeah, great question. So, I think that all of those 5 pillars, we have folks who are really engaged. Community economic development is always a crucial one, especially I think for folks who are working in downtown organizations, thinking about commercial development that is pairing with residential development. What does resident serving commercial development look like? Is a big topic all the time, especially when it's paired with historic reuse or adaptive reuse in one way or another. But one that I think we are seeing a growing interest in, and in a lot of ways it intersects with the community economic development work, is around food access. Food businesses, food-based businesses are something that we're really seeing as a growth area. It's not just even the sort of traditional food truck to bricks and mortar restaurateur, but some even more creative things, food production, and then also opportunities to really look on sort of a broader economic scale, particularly in Southeast Ohio. We see a lot of our members who are looking at food through an economic development, community economic development kind of lens. So we think that's exciting, especially in supporting folks who are also trying to think about agriculture in a different way, both in terms of getting fresh, healthy foods to folks, but also, what's their impact on the climate, and looking at the, development, and they're looking at agriculture as a way of developing their community as well.
Thanks, everyone. And just if you have any final comments you want to make, remember to get your 50% discount off your memberships now. Don't forget about that. That'll be ending soon. So any final comments, Tori or Andrew or Arabella or Julia?
Just want to say thank you to Heritage Ohio. Heritage Ohio has been a great partner for us for many years, and always admire the work that they do. And thanks for hosting us today.
Well, thank you. All right, everyone, that concludes today's webinar. We hope to see you at our next one. Next one will be being announced shortly. We're just wrapping up some final details on it. So look for that in your emails, look for it on Facebook, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.